This video is for Module 1 on your course OMBA 621. The study and practice of global business is both educating and intriguing as it synthesizes multiple disciplines. It brings in all the traditional skills a manager needs: marketing, production, finance, HR, but it also brings in culture, history, geography, religions, beliefs in different nations, and it gives us a world view of business. You have a great textbook, and all the relevant concepts are covered in it. In this video, however, I will try to give you an appreciation of how culture, political systems, economic history, legal systems, and other influencers shape and affect the conduct of global business. I will cover a few countries, but I encourage you to look up details on your own. I have no doubt you'll find it very exciting, and I'm always available to clarify and discuss. Charles Dickens wrote around the time of the French Revolution in The Tale of Two Cities. He said, "We live in the best of times and the worst of times." Today, that statement looks just as true as it could be at any time. We will start with our own home country, the United States. We are a nation of immigrants, a democratic nation founded on the principles of freedom, which include free trade. The United States is now the epitome of open market economies. It is the largest economy in the world at a GDP of 21 trillion. And from the start, the United States was entrepreneurial meritocracy at its best. And it attracted the finest minds and entrepreneurs of the world at all times. We also have a very well established legal system, and the rule of law makes it attractive for anybody in the world to do business with us. We are also blessed with an enormous land mass and natural resources ranging from coal, oil, gas to precious metals. But our greatest strength is our ability to attract and retain the best minds and entrepreneurs in the world. We truly are a melting pot with most nationalities, regions, religions, and languages represented. From a global business standpoint, the world wars of the 20th century gave the United States a huge boost. At that time, at the end of the Second World War, also, the economies of most of the world were decimated, and the US remained the main source of consumer and capital goods for the rest of the world. Via Reconstruction, the Marshall Plan, giving aids to different countries, American products went all over the globe. Labor arbitrage has always been one of the biggest motivators for international trade. After the Second World War, American businesses outsourced initially to Japan, who learned and improved on the processes that we gave them, the US gave them, in electronics, in automobiles, and different technologies. As Japan prospered, their labor costs increased, and manufacturing moved to lower cost destinations like Taiwan and South Korea, which in time followed the same trajectory, and then manufacturing went to Hong Kong and then to mainland China. Vietnam, Malaysia, India, Mexico have also stepped into that role now with lower manufacturing costs. But as a consequence, the United States has lost some jobs and manufacturing in industries such as textiles, steel, and others. And also, as other countries increased their capacity and US businesses continued outsourcing manufacturing, export from those countries and imports into the United States increased, and the trade deficit also went up. The largest beneficiaries are our largest trading partners: China, the United States, the European Union, Japan, Canada, and Mexico. From the end of the Second World War and up until the 1980s, the US balance of trade was positive. After that, it steadily decreased to where it is now about 2.85% of the GDP. Is this a worrisome number? I don't know. It's for the economists. But the United States has an enormous capital base, wealth, and a reserve currency, the US dollar, in which most global trade is transacted. This does help us, but there are challenges. As an example, there are challenges even today to the US dollar remaining the only reserve currency. Once again, our openness, rule of law, and legal systems help us maintain superiority, but others are catching up. We are in an era of increased competition where flattening of technology and education creates skilled workers all over the world. However, innovation and entrepreneurship still remains a cornerstone of the US economy, understanding that there is still a lot of competition creeping in. And there is a huge debate about public investment in the skills and jobs of the 21st century. In summary, while we are still ahead, we need to increase the gap, utilizing our legal systems, homogeneous culture, and entrepreneurial spirit. We will benefit more from skills arbitrage and not just labor arbitrage. The next country I want to discuss is China. China is a fascinating subject. It's the second largest economy with the GDP of 17 trillion. Its civilization and culture is thousands of years old and is very diverse with 13 official languages and multiple ethnicities. We only know Han Chinese and Mandarin as the language which is most commonly known. Confucianism and Buddhism, which came from India, form core beliefs in China. Today's China was born out of a revolution in 1949, which makes China 73 years old, as compared to the United States, which is about 246 years old. This revolution in China was similar to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, and it has been based on Marxist principles. While Russia has been experimenting with democratic reforms since 1979, China and the Communist Party have maintained a strong grip on its economy and beliefs. Economic reform started in China after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976 under Deng Xiaoping. So the growth of China from a poverty-stricken country to the second largest economy in the world in 45 years or so is truly remarkable. However, it is a closed economy with a state-controlled currency and a dubious legal system. China's growth, for the most part, was facilitated by Western businesses looking for cheaper labor and higher profits. Strategically, the Chinese state provided cheap labor force while also learning business and manufacturing techniques and then improving upon them. Only lately, practicing religion has been allowed openly, which is predominantly Buddhism. And China's huge middle class of educated, efficient, and hardworking people has benefited from that openness. The Communist Party and the state has huge ambitions for the future and a huge appetite. Their strategies include investing in infrastructural development in other countries through the Belt and Road Initiative and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is with 14 nations, the 10 nations of ASEAN, as well as Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, etc. In summary, China is on the march. It is state directed and state funded, with a large entrepreneurial base and capital base that can match the United States. She is very aggressive and ambitious, and her muscle has enormous repercussions for future global trade. I now discuss my own home country, my country of birth, India. India, too, is an enormous country with a civilization that is thousands of years old. It has 35 states formed on linguistic basis, which would mean that there are 22 major languages and many sub-languages and dialects and thousands of sub-ethnicities. India is a secular country and every religion and faith in the world is represented. It is the birthplace of Hinduism, Buddhism, and many other offshoot religions, but all of them are rooted in achieving peace and harmony. It is a wonderful kaleidoscope with as much or more diversity as all the countries in Europe, with each state having its own language, culture, and history. Today, it is the sixth largest economy at $3 trillion of GDP. It's way less than China and way less than the United States. But while on that comparison, the third largest economy after USA and China is Japan, with a GDP of 6 trillion, which is only one third of China. India has been under foreign rule in part or whole from about the 12th century until 1947. So that makes India 75 years old, only 2 years older than China from a business perspective. There are massive changes or massive differences, however. At the time of independence from Britain in 1947, India was unfortunately a very, very poor country, hollowed out by colonial powers, but fortunately it chose to be a democracy. There are both benefits and disadvantages to India being a democracy. While there is freedom, decisions are slower and kludgy, and as a result of which, India is way behind China from an economic perspective. It is today the largest and probably the most robust democracy in the world, and it has experienced multiple forms of government: foreign rule, Turkic and Persian Muslim rulers, colonial rulers, the British and the French, a socialistic pattern of government after independence, and now an open economy. After independence, in order to spur economic growth, India adopted the economic planning models of Soviet Russia, which focused on 5 year planning cycles for industry, agriculture, education, etc. It has a permanent planning commission as part of the government. However, given the poverty and population in the initial stages, India adopted a socialistic pattern of society. But the controls that the government instituted stifled economic growth. It was only in the 1990s that India started to open up, but foreign exchange reserves were critically low. In fact, in 1990, I almost went bankrupt here in the US because of non payment of my invoices, which were in US dollars. They had plenty of rupees, but that was of no use to me. I remember in India, as I was growing up, and in the 70s and 80s, before I moved to the US in 1986, I remember times of great shortages and rationing was the norm. Foreign goods, any kind, even chewing gum, was coveted. And I remember whenever my brother came from the US to visit in the 70s, he had bags, two bags full of gifts, what we call gifts, but which we now consider to be bare necessities. nappies and clothing and peanut butter and chocolates. In those days, indigenization was the watchword to curtail imports and manufacture replacements for everything because India had to conserve hard currency, which was the US dollar and the British pound. As an example, in 1977, IBM and Coca Cola and some other Western companies were booted out of the country because of their monopolistic practices. They wanted to sell their products, but not establish manufacturing or provide local employment, and also wanted to be paid in US dollars. IBM, which had the mainframe, was booted out, and the entire industry, the computer and the IT industry, was in India, started to revolve around Unix based processors. And a whole industry came online. India became a leader in programming and distributed programming. And my business, one of my businesses, was based entirely on that. Coca Cola, too, was replaced by locally made colas, which were not bad at all. India's foreign exchange reserves have never been too large because the country imports oil, and oil is transacted in the reserve currency, which is the US dollar. Similarly, other essential goods, including manufacturing plants and machinery, are also traded with hard currency. In the initial stages, there was a huge trading block between India and Russia because of this, and India imported and imported both machinery and technology from Russia because India could trade with Russia in Indian rupees. So heavy equipment, steel plant technologies came from Russia for a long time. Democracy and population growth in India remain insurmountable challenges, but it has an educated, young population which offers a lot of hope, and of course, a large consumer base for global trade. India also has a very established, very open legal system which makes it easy to do business in. In summary, India has a huge potential because political and legal systems are similar to that of the US and Western Europe. It has an educated middle class and very capable technocrats and managers. But political and geopolitical challenges are a hurdle that need to be surmounted. Briefly, I will discuss Western Europe, which is another large trading bloc. From the 14th century till the 20th century, the nations of Western Europe determined the fate of many other nations and continents. Global trade, however, evolved because of these nations. And how that happened is both very relevant and very fascinating. Coming out of the Dark Ages and after the fall of the Roman Empire, Spain and Portugal, and then the Dutch and French, and finally the British and the Germans sailed all over the globe in terms of riches. The mandate was to find gold, which was the only medium of conveying wealth. Financing mechanisms like letters of credit via bankers like the Rothschilds had not yet evolved. But when they did, they actually facilitated a lot of trade. Through all this, they did establish the basis of foreign trade, the movement of goods from country to country, payments, trade routes, contracts, joint ventures, etc. And they also brought goods, including things like tea from China to be grown in India and Sri Lanka and Kenya. The Portuguese had brought cashews from Brazil to India. This is just an example, but there were many other items that were brought from one country to another for lower costs of manufacturing and facilitate trade. Some of the European nations just plundered, gathered what they could, and left. Some stayed, governed, and survived into the 20th century, like the British Empire with India. And India was called their jewel in the crown. However, it's important to know that as a consequence of colonial movements, South America, Central America, and even parts of North America speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, and English. North and Sub Saharan Africa, as well as Central Africa, speak French. India speaks English along with its national languages. Australia and New Zealand speak English. Forms of government and legal systems also vary in part because of colonial influences. All through the ages, however, the nations of Europe were at war with each other and nobody gained. Finally, after the Second World War and the First and the Second World War, which decimated their economies, to avoid another such disaster, the European Union was born, which became a trading bloc with a common currency in 1993 called the euro. But language differences, cultural differences, and behavioral differences have effect on economies, as is evidenced by the four countries in Europe called pigs: Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Their economic development and their policies are different from Germany, Scandinavia, and France, and therein a little division. Now, with Brexit and a referendum coming up in Scotland, the United States is in transition too. The United Kingdom, I apologize, is in transition too, politically. But this will also have definite impacts on the economies of Britain and Europe as a whole. More to come on that. We still have not discussed the Middle East, Africa, Russia, Central Asia, or South America, which are all very potential for global business. Maybe at another time, but for today, if you look at global trade through the lens of political systems, culture, and the economic histories of nations, you will appreciate the interconnectedness and find it fascinating. As always, I am always available for any discussion on the subject. My very best to you.